Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined the Doctor as he travels the Vortex and arrive at episode number 444. And on this podcast, we change doctors as regularly as a snake sheds its skin. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
How are you guys?
I almost went out of turn.
That would have really thrown Sean off.
Yeah, especially since we're not even sitting in the same spots this week.
Oh.
It doesn't take much.
Did you guys have a good week?
Yes.
Yes, I had to think about it, but I'm pretty sure I had a good week.
Do anything fun? Watch any movies?
I watched a couple of films.
Did you watch any films that we aren't going to already discuss?
No.
I went and saw Joker.
How is it?
Challenging. It reminds me a little bit of Logan in that, you know, it's a pretty good movie, but at the same time, it's not necessarily an enjoyable movie to watch because Logan was so heavy. I think this one certainly has way more in common with stuff like Taxi Driver and Falling Down than it does any of the DC stuff. But Joaquin was phenomenal. He gave an inspired performance. And I'm still kind of percolating on it. I'm not sure. It's just, you spend most of it just being very uncomfortable.
So it wasn't necessarily a necessary and heavily tied into the DC universe?
No, not really. Obviously it's a Batman universe-esque title, so therefore we had to go through the origin of Batman again. But I will say they did something very unique and different with it that I did not expect or see coming until it happened. And then it was like, that was cool.
I didn't watch anything, but I did finish listening to the latest Diary of River Song box set. This is the one where she dips back into kind of either in the middle of or prequels to several classic Who stories, including the very first one with cast from Adventure in Space and Time. And for the most part, the stories are pretty good. It's another box set where they don't really tie the stories together at all, so they're all standalone tales. But the prequel to Web of Fear, called Web of Time, is probably the best out of the box, and that's the second story. The other ones they're pretty good, but that one is really well done. And the last one, because mostly because it's set as a prequel to Talons, I wasn't as impressed with it as probably most people are. Definitely worth listening to.
I didn't watch or listen to anything, but I did join in Ranker Pit this week over on Sci-Fi for Me, which is their Friday night. Every other Friday they do a live Star Wars talk back, and so I joined in on that, and it was fun. We talked a little bit about the films and re-release, and they're gearing up for 4K. We still haven't seen Disney say anything about releasing the films in their original form, that kind of stuff. So it was fun. Good 2-hour show. A lot of interaction and a lot of fun. All right, well, let's move on to feedback.
Feedback or news?
I know what I said.
All right, feedback. Our feedback this week comes from Jamie.
Jamie writes, "Ho flow low low po show vo plo ro to flow oh so ro."
Your Jadoon's better than your Klingon.
It's also a little easier to say.
I had a week to practice. The above chain is Jadoon for Hello Vortexers, translated using the online translator at jadoon.com. We should have them as a sponsor. I've gotten your coverage of the Atom reveal in Prisoners of Time 9. You only really began to suspect around issue 8, and that was with a handful of other names. Also, hearing your updated thoughts on the quintessential Hartnell story was enjoyable and entertaining. Episode 136 and the conclusion to the Divergent universe. Okay, you got me. I had Dreamweaver stuck in my head for about a day after listening to this one. You finally got an earworm to stick. It was nice to hear the overwhelmingly positive reception to the Capaldi casting announcement. I liked his take on the Doctor despite the complexity of the Series 9 arc. Caradroia. I remember enjoying this one. The splitting of the Doctor was fun and interesting. The Next Life. I enjoyed this one for the most part. Yes, it's a bit overlong with 3 discs instead of 2, and it didn't really need to be. However, we get more of Cariz's arc, which would culminate in Absolution. Episode 137 and the start of your 7th Doctor coverage. Dragonfire. I remember enjoying this despite the cliffhanger. I really like Ace, and her introduction here was quite good. We would later learn that the time storm that brought her to the Ice World was the work of Fenric, and I thought Kane was an excellent villain. Over the top, but still a realistic threat that was played straight. He wasn't silly over the top and was well acted. As for Shockwave, I remember enjoying this one, but that's about it. I don't have any strong feelings. Prisoners of Time 7. I enjoyed this one. The art was excellent, and I thought all the characters from the show were portrayed well. The Master in this feels like a bridge between the Ainley Master and the Eric Roberts Master. Episode 138 and Sarah Jane Season 4. Not anything to say here, as I haven't watched these. Moving on to 139 and the 7th Doctor retrospective. Am I the only one whose family watches National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation every year? I think it's the only Christmas movie we watch every year.
No, I watch it year to year to year to year. It's my favorite, one of my favorite Christmas movies.
And Sean, your rendition of Walking on Sunshine as a feedback song was very well done. Thank you, Jamie. I really don't remember the McCoy Revisited. I haven't watched it in ages, so I'll jump right into my 7th Doctor retrospective. I really like him. He's one of my favorites. He's fun, but also a schemer who has a dark edge to him. I enjoyed the Ace arc, but agree that the era could have been so much more. I think J&T's meddling, and if I understand it correctly, it was also the BBC that had issues with the show, but I think these things hurt it. The BBC keeping it on a 70s budget, but expecting 80s quality, especially with Next Gen starting the same year as McCoy, hurt as well. Of his TV run, I'd say Battlefield or Remembrance of the Daleks would be top picks for best representation of the era. The 7th Doctor did have the run of Virgin New Adventures and a large host of Big Finish that majorly extended his run, and I think he had a good evolution over his time on TV. Wish we'd have still gotten more. Episode 140 and the Green Death. I enjoyed this one. It's been a while, but I did enjoy it. Boss was decently done, and the maggots weren't terrible. The giant fly was kind of bad, but the CSO green screen was done well enough. It's not Underworld levels of bad, and the story is worth it just for Joe's departure alone. Episode 141 and the start of the 8th Doctor month. Great opening, Keith, what with breaking the vial and oops. Exceedingly enjoyable. As for Terra Firma, it's been a long time since I've listened to this one, and I didn't care for it much. It was very confusing and not where it makes more sense as you progress. I just didn't like it. As for Samson and Gemma, their time with the Doctor is confusing. As for the 8th Doctor Revisited, I agree that it was horribly underwhelming, and you can only reiterate the plot of the TV movie so many times. Granted, that was all they had since they were only using TV stories and Night of the Doctor hadn't dropped yet, which is probably where McGann was, as his absence was very keenly missed. Episode 142. Did I hear a prediction of the 5-ish Doctors reboot in the news section of this episode? I think you were talking about Davison denying these things and then being at filming something or another. Nice job. Enemy Aliens. I enjoyed this one. It's probably the Destiny of the Doctor that I've listened to the most. The actual Space Aliens plot was a nice twist in being hardly relevant to the main plot, and Michael Maloney is rather good in the role. However, overall, a strong addition to the series. One good thing that you mentioned is Charlie's violent streak and how it just didn't seem like her. And I go back and re-listen to Seasons of Fear. She has quite the imaginative violent streak there as well. Prisoners of Time 8, the one that let everyone down. I think that of the individual issues of Prisoners of Time, which is an excellent series, this is the one I like the least. The story's meh, the art's awful, the villains aren't very memorable, and I, for one, didn't think Grace needed to come back. Yes, I like Grace, she's very likable, but she had a story arc in the TV movie that ended. I could see if the Doctor got involved in something on Earth, maybe including Grace, but she didn't need to travel in the TARDIS. She grew as a person and had the arc companions usually have in the TARDIS over the course of the film. Your rants on the topic were really entertaining as always. So the big question has to be, what comprises the Eighth Doctor's era? At the time you guys did your retrospective, all you had was the TV movie, Night of the Doctor, which is far superior in my eyes, hadn't dropped yet. So the Eighth Doctor, I would say he's probably my favorite, with 10 close behind and 4 and 7 vying for third. He has a love of adventure and discovery that is just contagious. McGann brings so much range to the character that you just can't help but love him. Following his run through Big Finish, it feels like you've been there for all the ups and downs. And I think McGann's Big Finish run feels most like a TV era. What is McGann's quintessential Eighth Doctor story? I'd choose the minisode. It's shorter, for one, and has less narrative production issues than you have with the TV movie. As for audio, I'd say Chimes, Fear, Storm, and Blood. It'd be Chimes of Midnight, Storm Warning, Blood of the Daleks, and Seasons of Fear. Very clever, Jamie, sneaking those in there. Episode 143 and the BBC Eighth Doctor Adventures. I've only read 7 of the 73 releases in the series, and I hadn't read the 2 from this episode, Earthworld and Trading Spaces. Sounds like they're decent enough, although having a wiki helps understanding things a bit better. I really think having you guys go through the Eighth Doctor's line and or the Virgin New Adventures with the Seventh Doctor would make for some great episodes. Episode 144, Night of the Whisper. I thought this was fine, but that's about it. I don't remember much else about it. I have thought that Briggs's Ninth Doctor, while good, still sounds off. As for Sean's Hawaiian vacation, I had fun listening to his accounts, including getting lost by the highway. It was more fun to listen to, I bet. Episode 145. So, despite not being a fan of vampires, werewolves, zombies, etc., I really like Project Twilight. It's really well written and acted. Colin shines, Evelyn does well, and Nimrod is one of Big Finish's best original villains. The Forge arc continues in Project Lazarus before tying in with the first Hex arc. And again, it's a really good story. Endgame. I haven't read it, but I did look, and it's the last of the novels featuring the Eighth Doctor traveling solo. As for Prisoners of Time 9, I enjoyed this one. The story was good, the art was good, and they captured 9 well, and the reveal was done well. That's it for this round, 10 episodes, but I've tried to keep things short. Looking forward to the next 5, and I'll be at 150. At the time of this writing, I only have 289 episodes left to get through. Keep up the good work. Go plo do show lo troco no. Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, should we move on to news?
Let's move on to news. First up in news, a long while back, it seems, we had news about what looked like a fan reproduction of the Mission to the Unknown episode that Nicholas Briggs was going to be a part of. And now it has been announced that it is going to premiere on the Doctor Who YouTube channel exactly 54 years after it was screened in the UK, which is October 9th.
Yeah, it's not really a fan production per se. It was a college over there that did it, or a university that did it over there.
Right.
Part of it.
I'm not sure what the best way to call it, since I don't know. It was BBC.
It was part of a film project. No, it wasn't BBC produced. It was a film project for a class that the students came up with, conceived based on the. I wish I could remember the name of the university, but based on that particular episode, they scripted it and did as close to the original as they could. And they invited, cast members. Peter Purvis, as you said, was there, and Nicholas Briggs helped out. And there was some hope that the BBC would, sanction it and do something with it. So now that's kind of come to fruition. So
pretty cool. I look forward to watching it when it drops on the 9th.
Yeah, the beauty of doing that particular story too is the fact that there's no Doctor in it. There's no companions in it. So you can pretty much recast everybody and not have that little issue with, they recast the Doctor, they recast Stephen or something like that. And you don't have to do that. You can just say, well, we've recast characters that people either aren't familiar with or won't remember in the first place.
Yeah, and any aliens that would show up in the big story are not significant enough in that, from what I remember, that it would notice if they were recast anyways.
Well, and I think they're so heavily prosthetic and makeup
exactly.
in the actual Daleks master plan. So yeah, you definitely wouldn't remember.
Really cool. I'm glad it's getting to see the light of day.
University of Central Lancashire. University of Central Lancashire. That was the university. Okie doke. Well, let's move on to our reviews.
What? There's still a little bit more news.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
New details on the second season of Titans Comics, The 13th Doctor, were unveiled at New York Comic Con. In the first story arc, we'll see the 10th and 13th Doctors join forces against the Weeping Angels, and will also feature the Autons. So it's a multi-Doctor story to kick off the second season.
Cool.
Same production staff, writers, and I think the art too. So
Production
staff,
staff.
whatever. Creative people behind the scenes.
So this is
Creative
the
team.
comic?
Yes.
I had seen this bit of news pop up, but it popped up at a time when I wasn't really able to pay attention to it, and I, in the corner of my head, thought it was on the show for season 2, not the comic for season 2. So you've clarified that for me. Thank you.
And it's going to come out in January, and there's going to be 2 holiday specials coming out, one in November and one in December. So holiday special issues.
I was going to say, again, we're talking comics here.
Yes. Comic issues, not episodes. And our last bit of news is a couple of con announcements. Chicago TARDIS just announced Arthur Darvill as their first guest for this year. And Planet Comic Con announced John Cleese as a guest.
Doctor Who alum.
Yes.
Uncredited Doctor Who alum.
But much celebrated.
Yes.
By Glenn.
Yeah, I think he's awesome.
Yes, I just think of other things first before Doctor Who when I think of him.
Wonder if we could push for a panel.
As much as I enjoy City of Death.
I can't think of anything else John Cleese was in.
He's such an obscure
Didn't he do that one
actor.
movie with Jamie Lee Curtis?
He did a couple of movies with Jamie Lee Curtis. One that we choose to forget, one that we absolutely
I
love.
remember Jamie Lee Curtis. That's about it.
Fish Called Wanda is in my top 10 films of all time. Favorite 10 films of all time. All right, should we move on to our reviews now?
The House That Dripped Blood. A Scotland Yard inspector's search for a missing film star leads him to a haunted house. The house sets the framework for 4 separate tales of terror, written by the author of Psycho, Robert Bloch, and starring horror icons Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, and Ingrid Pitt. All 4 stories center on the mysterious fates of tenants who have leased the mansion over the years.
Bum, bum, bum.
That warms my heart that you like this one.
I really liked this one.
I like this one a lot, too.
I think one of the beauties with anthology stories is that if you get a clunker, you just move on.
Yeah.
There's something else coming, and maybe that one will be better. And I hadn't really realized how much I kind of missed the old Tales from the Crypt series. Old, the one from the 90s. Until watching these, and they just kind of started bringing all those feelings back, and it was like, I should look those up.
Well, and the nice thing about the movie format, as opposed to like the TV series format, is you just have to wait 20 to 30 minutes, and then you're on to the next story. You don't have to sit through a whole hour of a story you're not impressed by. Although all of these I thoroughly enjoyed. There wasn't one of them that I thought, that one wasn't too great. I had fun watching all of them.
I'll break them down individually for us, Glenn. We know you're dying to.
Oh, just, they're so good. I mean, Dellum Elliott again returns in another one of these type of stories, and it's just odd still to see him so young and not Marcus Brody. I'm like you. I like the style. And again, these came from, they were all written by Robert Bloch, who actually scripted this as well. And they're all from short stories that he did in pulp, magazines back in the day. I think 1962. One was from 39. One was from 47. One was from 39. He obviously updated these, and modernized them a bit. But Fury, Weird Tales, and I don't know where this other story comes from, but those were the particular pulp novels that these were published in originally. So I really like that style of horror or thriller. There's some sort of like classic nostalgic vibe to them that's just really good. The first one, it's it's a variation on a theme, but it's at the same time very original with the writer thinking he created his his character, setting it up with when he writes, he can actually see in his mind's eye the characters, and he really gets into them. And writers, or you've heard interviews with writers that do that, and so there's a sense of realism, and then to turn it around on it to be a framing scheme between his wife and this other guy. It's very much, oh, aha, I know what happened there. But for him then to be insane and kill her at the end, I thought was crazy. I didn't expect that at all. Not that I expected it to be a setup between the two, but for it to turn around and have that shock moment of, who's Richard? I'm Dominic. And they kind of leave you with that ambiguous. Does he really believe he's Dominic because he's nuts, or is it because he really did manifest the character from his novel?
That's what I really liked about the story, was he could take it either direction. If we're led to believe that this house has some sort of supernatural ability or, influence on its residents, then you kind of have to go with the idea that he actually manifested this person.
And it's something
too.
that maybe you come back to thinking about later, especially when you realize that the house does have a certain element of supernatural quality to it, because early on they they play very light with the supernatural element, and then they lean really heavy into it by the end, as they go. And so I think that's what I really like, because the first two stories of this are relatively realist and grounded in reality, and the last two are very much fantasies, which really kind of, it's a nice drive from one end of the spectrum to the other. And then it makes you call back to this and think, well, maybe he was a manifestation, because as you said, this house is influencing all of these stories in some way.
Yeah, you pretty much hit it on the head with the writer's conjuring of things. I'm pretty sure Cyberman Bob is still under the couch. But Denholm is just such a solid actor. And I've not seen him in much other than, Indiana Jones, which I love. But to see something like this and just kind of see a different shade was just kind of a treat. It was really, really cool. And I think we've all had those moments where, we freak ourselves out. The mind plays tricks on us. And, a storm outside the window, and you flash and you look and you see a shadow in the chair, or whatever, those kinds of things. But to carry it to the degree that this film does, it was absurd and awesome, because it was just this one, I think, to me felt probably the most like a Tales from the Crypt episode.
Yeah. And here's a little footnote for you. Tom Adams, who played Richard and Dominic, he actually played Vorshak, the commander of the Sea Base 4, in the Warriors of the Deep story in Doctor Who, which is ironic because we just had McCullough last week playing from that exact same episode. So we've got another Doctor Who connection here. If you don't remember, he was the commander. He was the one that he essentially saved the Doctor, because when Icthar tried to shoot him, he dove in front of him and took the blast. So.
Oh, the UK actorship.
It says she was, to say the least,
proving to be smaller and smaller.
Should we move on to the next one? Because this one was the one that the first time that I saw it, I didn't like it as much as I did this time. But this time, I think each time I've watched this twice now, and each time I've liked the stories in a much different, unique order, which I think is weird. Because I think the last time I watched it, The Cloak was my favorite, and I think part of that was the fact that because it was Jon Pertwee in the role, and it almost gets to kind of this campy, silliness of it. But Waxworks was one of my, that was okay. It was a good story. This time, though, watching it, I enjoyed it so much more, and it elevated for me as far as my like for it in comparison to the other ones. And I think I almost like this one the best now, and which is really interesting to go from bottom of the heap to top of the heap. But again, I think it's because we get two doctors this week. We get Jon Pertwee later. We get Peter Cushing again, playing this bereaved man who's lost his. Was it his wife or his lover or something? Anyway, the woman that he loves, and then find her likeness in this wax museum, I thought was crazy. And then the old friend who was also part of this love triangle with her, gets obsessed with it as well. And I kind of this one. I think maybe another thing I didn't like about it last time I felt it was a little predictable. I sort of kind of had figured it out before it happened, because I think they telegraph it all the way through. But I think maybe this time I was able to kind of zero in on the performance. And we talk about how just utterly charming Peter Cushing is. He just oozes of charm in this one as well, even though he's very almost on his back footing the entire time, because he's so disturbed by the fact that he has seen this image of his love. And his performance is so good. Even the guy that's with him, and I wish I could remember the actor's name. Must have been Joss Ackland. Yeah. I think he does a good job too. I think the only thing that bothered me, and it's, Sean and I are completely different people. We're kind of an odd pairing, but these two didn't seem like, two guys that would hang out with each other. And I think I don't know why I felt that way, but they try to pull it off as though they're old friends, but it's, for some reason, the chemistry isn't quite there with them, and I think that's the only detriment to this story. Not that neither of them did a poor job, but they just, there was something about their friendship didn't quite gel.
I think it's something to do with Peter Cushing, because he portrays himself in such a way and carries himself in such a manner that he almost comes across as he is below friendship. Like, I am such a sophisticated gentleman that I am better than any lowly friendship could be. At least that's how I always envision him and how he comes across to me on screen. So I wonder if that's
maybe they sort of do seem to be cut from different cloths, though he's maybe more upper society, and the other guy maybe is a little more blue collar. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, the other guy has definitely kind of got that you're going to come over and hang at the house for a beer and a football game vibe. And I don't know that I can ever imagine Peter Cushing watching football ever. I mean, maybe he did. No. I don't know, but yeah, no, don't get that vibe from him. I kind of fall down on Glenn's initial assessment. Going through this is my first time with The House That Dripped Blood, and I'll tip my hat. The Pertwee segment was my favorite, probably because it was Pertwee. But this segment, as much as I love Peter Cushing, doesn't work for me. And I think it's the weakest of the set. But now my reasoning for thinking it's the weakest of the set has everything to do with the plot and the setting. When you give me an anthology called The House That Dripped Blood, and then we don't really spend a whole lot of time in the house in this segment. We're in the village, we're in the wax museum, we're back and forth on the road. We're just kind of all over the place. It seemed odd to me. Especially coming off the Denholm Elliott one, because I kind of thought that maybe I knew where I had this pegged, that it was going to be this, supernatural ghost stories kind of house, and suddenly wasn't. And so, like Cushing, I was on my back foot through most of this, kind of going, where are you going with this? And then when we get to the reveal that not only does this woman look like his former love, but she actually is the wax museum guy's former love. Like you said, it became very telegraphed. Well, I know what's going to happen. Now obviously the poster image kind of reveals that too. But
that's true.
So, well, we know where this is going to wind up. It's just a question of how, and the how. I don't know. It felt a little anticlimactic for me. And maybe if I go back and watch it again, I'll feel differently about it because, Peter Cushing is obviously wonderful. And so there's no qualms with the performance level there at all.
Yeah, I think I kind of fall in between the two of you. While I enjoyed the performances, I do agree that the plot was a bit predictable, but the performances were so captivating for me that I had no issues with the plot. I was just along for the ride.
All right. Well, should we move on to the next one?
Sweets to the Sweet, looks like was what it was called. It's almost odd to me to see Christopher Lee so young.
I know, right?
I mean, I've watched several Hammer horror films where he is young like this, and it's still, I almost forget that I'm watching Christopher Lee because I'm so used to him being older.
Well, that's just it. I mean, we're so used to him in Lord of the Rings and Star Wars that he had that resurgence of his career there late in life, and that's kind of the things that we're familiar with. But I grew up watching so many Hammer films that I've probably seen more films with him at that age than I did him as Count Dooku. So back when he started as Count Dooku and Saruman, he looked old to me in those. So I kind of had the reverse of that. Just seeing him and going, oh man, Christopher Lee looks so old now. So so I wasn't taken aback by that, but this is one of the roles, probably one of the first things that I've seen, that he really had a lot. I mean, for as short of a little clip or piece of this film that it is, he has a lot more time to develop. When you see him in the Dracula, well, particularly if you see him in the Frankenstein films, he's always plays the monster, so there's very little for him to. There's very little dialogue. But then when you see him in Dracula, he even then doesn't have a lot of lines. It's very much just an ominous presence. But I mean, he has lines, but it just seems like when you give him a role where he kind of, put his chops into it. I guess he did with Dracula, but literally. But when you put him to a role where he can really, utilize those acting chops, I think you kind of appreciate the actor a little bit more as well. And I think he has more substance in this as a young actor. So to me, that's what's different because, as Dooku and as Saruman, he does have a lot more screen time. He has a lot more dialogue. So you see that there, but in his younger days, there wasn't a lot of roles that I recalled that he wasn't, the monster or the bad guy of the film.
Yeah, that's true.
I kind of come down with Keith. The big one that I knew Christopher Lee from before the resurgence was Man with the Golden Gun.
Ah, yes, yeah.
Which is a wonderful performance from him, but again, bad guy.
Well, even then, he seemed kind of old.
Yeah, he kind of had the silver streaks in the hair thing going on, but it was weird to me because I'd seen that film 100 times, and then turn around and see him in Lord of the Rings, see him in these other things where he's legit older, and then I would go back and watch Man with the Golden Gun, and it still shocks me.
And he looks so young.
It still shocks me that he's that young. So then seeing him in this was like, whoa, like baby face Christopher Lee. Not that I would ever say that to his face because he scares me. But yeah, you mentioned his gravitas as an actor, certainly in the later years that we've kind of become accustomed to. But I definitely think it was there all along.
Yeah.
This is kind of a definite indicator of it. And I liked this one a lot. Although again, I thought it was a little predictable. As soon as he dropped the line about I feared her mother too or something along those lines, I went, okay, yeah, she's a witch. I just knew before the kid even did anything creepy.
Well, the initial fear of fire was also a kind of a huge tip off.
See, and I think that this segment does a really good job of not letting you in on all of the details too soon. And it's not until very much later, well, halfway through, where he says, that her mother was a witch. And so leading up to that, there's some mystery. There's something wrong with this girl, something off. And I didn't take the fear of fire necessarily of the fact that the little girl, was a witch or could perform witchcraft. I just took it as there was something tragic that happened that affected her. And so they play that very tight for a long time of what is up with this girl. Why is she so weird? Why does he seem scared of her? Or he's very strict at first, because I don't get the impression that he doesn't come across that he's scared of her until, the teacher lady keeps kind of pressing for different things.
Yeah.
Can she have toys, and this, getting permission to have toys, and why can't she go see other kids and that kind of thing. And so I think they do kind of drop that bomb about halfway through with, well, her mother was a witch, and he's not scared of the daughter, or he wasn't scared of the wife. He's scared of the daughter. I guess he was scared of them both, um, but I think they do a really good job of kind of playing that close to their chest for a long time, and then build on that. And then when you're kind of, you presume, okay, well, the little girl must be, that's why he's so, strict with her, and why he's so, kind of an overbearing father, is because of the fact that he's trying to protect himself. He's trying to protect her. He's trying to protect others. And it's at that point where you kind of, okay, well, so that's probably why she's being overprotected, but what kind of power does she have over him? And then to, the throwing the doll in the fire, it's almost a surprise of, okay, there's some reason why she can't have dolls, but you still don't necessarily know why until she makes the waxwork one.
Yeah, which was a nice subtle hint to it. And the ironic thing is, because the role of Christopher Lee later in life as being the villain, I didn't really trust him at first, because
Yep.
he's the bad guy.
Right.
But he's not. He's just trying to protect his daughter.
Yeah. And himself and others.
Oh, yeah. So he also portrays that very well, of you don't know if you should trust him and what his motivations are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they did a very good job with doling out little parcels of information throughout this one, and his aloof presence in the house kind of added to that air of, what is up with you, and why are but the reveal was great. Even though I saw it coming, it was still aha, there we are. And so it was a satisfying, that we finally get to it.
It's sort of a slow reveal, because it's slowly revealed once you get past the halfway point, but it still develops into a shocker, because you don't really kind of expect what sort of power she can have until she has it.
Right.
And that's when it's like very, oh, wow.
It's kind of it almost comes across also as he's trying to protect her and keep her from developing the power further, and you don't realize how far she really is.
He's kind of misguided in the fact that he thinks that he can protect her from it,
to keep her from developing her powers.
Right. And I don't think I think he must suspect that she potentially is powerful already, but if he keeps the elements that give her the vehicle to utilize those powers away from her, he's very misguided in that. But to keep those away from her, I think he thinks he has control of the situation, but he doesn't have control of the situation, as we learn later, because she's very resourceful.
Well, and as a viewer, you're not sure if his motivations are, to try to keep the things away from her, or to keep her from developing the power. Not so much his motivations, but as the viewer, you're not sure which direction he's trying to go with it.
All right. Well, let's move on to the one that to me is still top of the barrel. It is a highlight, and it all comes down to the fact that Pertwee's playing this as a comedy, which is interesting, because I read that when Pertwee, this was an interview with Pertwee, that a lot of these were written. This whole thing was supposed to be a horror comedy, all of it, every element of it, not just his. And what happened was, last minute, the powers that be at not Americus, Amicus, I was still doing it, came in, and they wanted strictly horror, so they had to cut out a lot of the comedy elements. And he said that, particularly his segment suffered from that. I think that a lot of the comedy still comes through, and I don't think it's overt comedy. It is very kind of submersive, dark comedy that comes through, but the comedy is still there, and it's down to the fact of the way that Pertwee portrays the character.
I totally agree that his segment is a comedy. It felt so, and not in a bad way, but glaringly different from the other three segments, which were all kind of slow burn, dour, kind of things. And then along comes this one, and it's again, I hate to kind of keep going back to Tales from the Crypt, but it's the closest analogy. Tales from the Crypt always had a dark humor to it. But even when you'd watch the show, you would get, okay, this is the gruesome episode. This is the standard episode. Oh, this is the comedy. You know, they always threw those comedy episodes in that were kind of peppered throughout the seasons. And this was the comedy. It just came across that way. And I can't imagine that his segment suffered them. I would think, if anything, that this was the one they just simply couldn't cut anything out of.
Yeah.
But maybe not.
It sounds like from his account, there was a lot. In fact, he felt that the segment suffered because of that, but I don't think it suffered in any way because it's still just, it really shines through.
As an academic exercise, I'd be really kind of curious to try and track down an original copy then to see what was there.
Well, I don't think it exists because they cut the script before they shot it. So.
Oh, they cut the script before.
Yeah,
okay.
they cut the pieces out of the script before it was even shot.
Gotcha.
So. Yeah.
Well, and knowing that he was also predominantly a comic actor, he did comedies for pretty much everything until he got the role of the Doctor.
Well, even this was shot between seasons of Doctor Who, so he was already starring as the Doctor when they filmed this.
That's true.
So he already had the role. The other cool thing about this is that, did you notice in his dressing room, in the pictures on the wall surrounding the mirror, there's a picture of him as the Doctor standing in front of Bessie.
I did see that.
I did not. I'll have to go back and look for that now.
I didn't catch it till my second viewing. And of course, you know, the other connection is, and within the same time frame, he also performed with Ingrid Pitt, who played what's her name in this? Clara, I think. She was in The Time Monster with Jon Pertwee. She played.
It was the Queen of Atlantis, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So she played Queen of Atlantis in that. So we got another Doctor Who connection here. Of course, Ingrid Pitt, she's been a horror actor for years and years, even before this particular film. She was in a lot of campy horror films in the 60s.
And then went on to be in The Wicker Man.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but the guy that played the caretaker, not the caretaker, the shopkeeper, Theo von Hartmann, did you recognize him?
I did not.
Mm-mm.
So he is the astrologer in Creature from the Pit with Tom Baker.
Oh.
He was the creepy astrologer, or not creepy, but the kind of goofy astrologer guy. Cloris, I think was his name. Who he made the predictions for the woman of the house, you know, the main baddie gal. That's who that was.
As Keith said, at some point you stop being surprised.
Yeah.
Over here we have 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. The English just have acting. Everybody's in everything.
Yeah.
Gosh, this is a lot of fun. In fact, Pertwee also, I saw in one of the things I was reading that he, as he was portraying the character, his performance was based on Christopher Lee's performance in horror film. In fact, he was channeling Christopher Lee, and there is that line where he, you know, and of course Dracula, but the Lugosi one, not the chap who's playing him now.
Yeah.
Which was the funniest, sickest burn I think I have ever heard.
Pertwee said in that same interview that Christopher Lee came to the set to watch, because they were friends back in the day, and he came to the set to watch Pertwee film, and never once figured out that Pertwee was basically performing the part as Christopher Lee.
Wow. Well, there's so much of it that seems like it's just Pertwee being Pertwee also.
Yeah.
Like he's
There's so much of the
portraying it
Doctor in
as,
it.
yeah, he's just being himself, and you could easily
Well,
just see him just having fun with it.
he has those terrific comedic expressions that always seem out of place in Doctor Who when he's being attacked, and he just had these things that he does with his eyes and his face,
The bulging.
and it works so well here because of the campiness of the particular segment.
And we got several of them here.
We did,
the shock look with the disappearing eyebrows, with I turned invisible, or the I'm being choked by an auton, or the just let's go down the list. Oh yeah, that was a Pertwee look, and the outfits when he walked onto the
wearing cloak alone, just the cloak.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, not only was this filmed during or between seasons of Doctor Who, he didn't change wardrobe. He just came right over from the set. And they put the hat on. So yes, I'm gushing over this just a little bit because there was so much fun to it. But it's actually, I think it's a decent story.
It is a good story, yeah.
The idea that these vampires are hiding out in the basement, gonna come get him.
Well, and the idea that a vampirism is partially passed along by this cloak, that the person who has the cloak is destined to become a vampire. I've never seen that in a story before, and I thought that was really clever.
Yeah, that was a new one.
Kind of turns vampire lore kind of on its ear.
Yeah.
And I think it works really well to kind of to wrap up the framework too of this, inspector that has now come to house to see for himself. Okay, what the realtor is completely warning him about this house, and to go down there, go into the basement, and then be attacked by the vampires. I thought, okay, that just was this nice little bow on everything, kind of wraps everything up nicely. But then the icing on the cake is to have the realtor come up and break the fourth wall and address the audience about the house. That was the icing on the cake for the whole thing.
And there is yet another connection to Doctor Who there. The guy who's playing the inspector looks like played in Talons of Wen Chiang. He played Chang.
Oh, is that right?
And General Finch in a different story, in Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
Oh, I did not know that
the
one.
Inspector was Chang?
Yeah.
Really?
If it weren't for his IMDb picture being Chang, I wouldn't have realized it either.
Wow. Really, IMDb?
I'll be darned. I did not see that one.
Yeah. Mel and I both just really enjoyed. I mean, that was kind of when I knew for sure that this was a winner, was when Mel was like, that was really good. I was like, okay, yeah. Because even she liked it.
Yeah, this is one I think I would go back to every Halloween, or just whenever I want to have some fun with a nice collection of stories.
For a movie called The House That Dripped Blood, there wasn't a spot of blood in the
really
entire
wasn't.
film.
What, this was PG?
Yeah.
And it really was.
It's almost all stated horror and no real visual stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the scariest visual thing is probably Cushing's head on the platter.
And even in that,
it's not bloody.
It's waxworks. And I mean, it's obviously his head there because it's disclosed that the guy's been encasing them in wax. But yeah, it's subtle enough that you don't see any gore. So
yeah,
it's definitely a lot bloodier than the image in the movie.
Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely.
The artistic director was going, no, we need more gore.
All right, well, should we move on to since we're doing Dr. Order here, Lair of the White Worm.
After a mysterious skull is unearthed, it is stolen and used by its new owner to worship a pagan god who hungers for the taste of virginal flesh in this cheeky horror comedy.
I don't have a big enough donut in me tonight. I loved this film, and I was a little shocked that I loved this film because it starts off and it's so slow. It's just kind of meandering its way through the thing. I mean, it's a Scooby Doo movie. You know, we're setting it up, and we've got meddling kids, and then we get a wonderful segment where the entire plot of this movie is spelled out for us by a rock folk Celtic band in song. And you're like, oh, okay. I bet the worm's going to show up. But it just, there's so many huge chunks of exposition that it would almost be off-putting. And then the camp starts to seep in. And there's more cheese in this movie than Flash Gordon. It's that level of cheesy. And it was so much fun. And I can't get over it. I really can't.
Well, first, I don't know what kind of Scooby-Doo you watched as a kid. That would have been the last thing I related this to, but I will say that I immensely enjoyed this film as well. But maybe from a perspective of this is a really, really bad film. It is a bad movie, but it's so bad that it's good. And it falls into the realm of the type of genre that I like. It has a very B movie film feel to it, and I think that's why to me it has a charming aspect of it's just you sit back once you realize what's happening, that this film is not taking itself entirely seriously, then you kind of sit back and you enjoy the ride. You sort of realize, okay, this is so bizarre that it's good. And that's where I fell down on it. And then the performances aren't even rock solid. The lady that played, the actress that played Lady Sylvia Marsh,
Amanda
Donahoe, she is the best thing about it. She really is. She is performing top notch. And even though she is chewing the scenery to the point where there should have been no scenery left, she is giving it her all, and she is doing such a terrific job in this role. Everybody else is almost subpar. Even people with the acting chops, and this would have been very early in their career. So Hugh Grant, who I think has always been a very good character actor, he even just feels like he's not quite on his game. While I enjoyed Peter Capaldi probably the most of our heroes, he too kind of comes across as amateurish, and the girls very much so. They almost feel like soap opera actresses is what the best I could say for them. Just very dramatic and very dry, but it as a whole, the chemistry just works because of the film that they're in.
There's something very just wacky 80s about this movie that I don't know if some of it is the sexualization in the movie that I didn't expect to happen.
Yeah,
it's overtly sexual throughout the entire
It
thing.
is. It is very much so.
But there's just something that I can't put my finger on that just makes it feel like a trippy 80s movie that could only be happen in the 80s that doesn't take itself too seriously because they're high.
Yeah, they certainly don't make them like this anymore.
Oh yeah, definitely not.
It's very much in the vein of before there was direct to video movies, there was almost direct to midnight showing movies. And that's what this one really feels like. In the 80s, you didn't have a lot of movies that went straight to video. Like we saw that surge in the 90s, really is when that kind of became a thing. But a lot of these films that would get produced, and a lot of times they were art films from the UK or Europe somewhere. They were always films that found a distribution in the US, but it was always very limited run, or it was midnight showings places that were more of kind of special event type things. And that this fits in that mold of those type of films very much. And it would be what eventually became the straight to video market in the 90s. But it managed to live in that realm of movies that were actually getting distributed in theaters, just in limited run.
It's definitely one of those movies that would have been on like HBO late at night.
And don't confuse my my enthusiasm for quality. As Glenn said, this is not a good movie, but it's so bonkers that it just is a lot of fun to watch. And it's funny, Keith, that you say it feels like an 80s movie, because the vibe that I got through the whole thing was almost 70s Doctor Who. This to me kind of had an Image of the Fendal feel to it, where we've got a cult.
I could see a little bit of Seventh Doctor in here.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a cult and we've got a house and there's a cave and it's connected to the house, of course, and and then Capaldi is doing Doctor Who things.
Well, Capaldi's performance to me felt very much like John Hannah in The Mummy. Even down to, for some reason, his accents. Every time he spoke, I had to do a double take to make sure it wasn't John Hannah.
I had not made that connection.
I don't know if it's just because they're both Scottish and young in those movies, and because they're both playing archaeologists. I don't know what the deal was, but it was not the Capaldi that I know and love today.
No, certainly was not the Capaldi that I know or was expecting, for that matter.
Especially even the accents.
The latter half of the film, when he showed up with the bagpipes. And was so forward thinking, when he ejects himself with the snake venom or the antidote. I was like, oh, you're pulling a doctor on her. This is going to be great because you're smarter than the other people in the room. I'm so excited. But apparently this is the one film that Hugh Grant is embarrassed to talk about.
I wonder why.
I don't know that he needs to be. I think he can just come out and say, yeah, it was
early days.
It was early. I needed a new water heater and move on. We'd still love him. But you're absolutely right. The two sisters were horrifying, and not in a horror way.
I think what this thing has going against it too is, and it makes it all the better for it, is the fact that, I mean, this was who did you say directed this? Was Peter Russell? Ken Russell. He did Gothic in 1988 or 86, I think it was. That's a terrific film. If you've not seen it, it's basically it's the night that Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, and what was Shelley's husband name? It's the night that they get together, and she essentially conceives the story of Frankenstein. They challenge each other to come up with a story or concept, and it's a terrific film. It's so well done, and I've always enjoyed it. And this was the second in a set of films. That one was Vestron as well. This was the second in a set of Vestron films, a 3-picture deal that he had. And he was wanting to make a prequel to a movie he did called Women in Love. And they said that he could do that film as long as he did this horror film, or he did a horror film. And this was the treatment that he came. And this is actually a modernization or modern adaptation of an original Bram Stoker story.
Yeah, I had no idea of that until I saw
the and Stoker wrote this story very late in his life, like just prior to his death. And it is one of the stories that people say it's Stoker's absolute worst art, and it's panned generally by literature critics. And I think it's amazing that they took Stoker's worst work and turned it into the worst movie, which again has some bit of
source materials.
Yeah, exactly. And it certainly has this just weird dynamic about it that it's really got everything going against it, but still turns out to be this really fun film.
I think a lot of that comes down to Ken Russell and his direction of it. Because there could have been someone who took that script and took it so seriously, and it would have been a bad movie as opposed to a fun movie.
Well, and I think that Russell's approach to it too was, there's a lot of clever, surreal things in it. He took the when she touches the crucifix, and you get the really just surreal, bizarre green screen effecting that they do with the Jesus figure on the cross, and just everything that's happening in the quick, the zip flashes of zip cuts of edits are just really kind of cleverly done in a way that it makes it that it lends a certain bit of art to it. And I think that comes down to him realizing that, I can really go all out with the production, but I've kind of got a limited budget. So let's take something that ultimately in a movie could look cheesy and give it an effect that makes it fit within the scope of what we're doing here. And I think that's why it works, because there are a lot of those little elements where we get these really kind of trippy, almost acid trip scenes that work really well within the film.
Yeah, and I think some of that is him pulling from his Tommy days.
Well, certainly.
And I think that's why I say it feels very 80s and very druggy and, almost pushing the sexual boundary in a way that only is done in the 80s, that is taking things that maybe, you could interpret sexually and making them ensured to be interpreted sexually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of skin in this too. I mean, this is very much, a Skinamax movie
Yeah.
that would show up late at night, and some of it is storytelling. Some of it I feel is legitimately there for the furthering of the story, because there is a lot of I don't know, cult versus religion subtext to what is going on with this snake god. And certainly the fact, as they point out later, that the foundation of the house is, there was a convent built there on top of this gravesite for these pagan gods. And so there's kind of this duality of nature and spirituality going on between the two factions. And so some of the nudity is there to kind of highlight this is what kind of cult this is. And some of it is just exploitive and there because this is the kind of film that it is.
Oh, yeah.
And what surprised me was not that it had nudity in it, but how far they took it. Because
the sacrifice.
The sacrifice scene in particular was, wow, we're going to go all the way to this level with it. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's that sort of thing more so than the nudity that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the just the nutty ideas that, okay, we've put loudspeakers on the roof of the mansion because our hero lives next door to the coal lady, and we're going to play snake charming music over the loudspeaker. And she's going to come out and emerge from a wicker basket and proceed to saunter across the living room floor as she's hypnotized out there.
Because of course she was in a wicker basket.
Because of course she's, totally, she sleeps in a wicker basket, right? Yeah, why not? You just don't find images like that in most cinema.
No, and that's certainly true.
Why Peter Capaldi's character had a live mongoose in his kilt, I don't know. It doesn't really matter because it worked.
When he first brought it out, I thought it was the stuffed version.
I was
like,
what's he
going to do with that?
I told Glenn, I've never actually seen a mongoose. Like, in my life, I've watched Ricky Tikki Tavi. That's as close as I have gotten to seeing a mongoose. And so when they showed this, I was like, oh, really? And then he pulls out a wombat. I'm like, what is that? What are you doing with it? And then it scurried across the floor. And I went, oh, that must be a mongoose. Why you would keep it in your kilt for just such an occasion, I don't know.
That seems dangerous.
Now, I do have to point out the absolute greatest bit of this film, which is the fact that bagpipes save the day. And, for all of the back and forth we've had with Glenn about the merits and values and beautiful or not, the music of the bagpipes, they apparently are good for warding off hypnotized snake cops. So that to me is definitely something in the plus column.
Well, I'm glad they were able to do something good with bagpipes.
I loved it when he ran out of breath, too.
Yeah.
Not in danger or anything. And then to see Hugh Grant pick up a claymore and cleave them. They're just the longer this went on, the higher the highs got. It just kept moving up. And then I think we have to discuss the ending. I initially I felt like, we kind of ruined this whole good vibe thing that I had going on with this ending. I know Glenn was very much in favor of it.
Oh, my favorite part is the ending, especially when the laboratory calls to tell him that they mixed up the medicines and that he ended up getting arthritis medicine, and the look on Capaldi's face just when the horror of realizing that he did not inject himself with snake venom, and there's a pretty good chance that now he's been infected with this worm, or we say worm, this snake. To me it was just again icing on the cake to get back into the car with Hugh Grant's character, and just the campy, shall we stop for a bite, and Hugh Grant shifting down and revealing pulling back the kilt and revealing the snake bite on the leg it was genius. It was just that's the way you end this kind of film.
I agree. I really like the ending.
I've come to terms with it.
And then to end it with the song.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
In the credits.
That had to make an appearance.
Which I don't know about you guys, but I could understand the words, and maybe it's because it's a studio version as opposed to maybe a mix of studio and live, but I could understand the words of the song a lot better.
I had captions on, so it didn't matter.
I had captions on as well, but I didn't initially. It was probably about midway through that party sequence when I gave up the ghost on trying to understand them and just went for the captions.
I didn't have it. In fact, this one I thought was really. There's some Doctor Who episodes that I think are harder to understand than this movie. I thought this movie was pretty clear and dry.
Capaldi's accent wasn't as thick. That's why.
That's true. It's very true. It wasn't. Good stuff. Well, what do we got coming up on the schedule next week?
Well, coming up on the schedule next week, we have more in our Beyond the Doctors. We're doing the Air Zone Solution, an environmental thriller for the 90s that features Peter Davison, Colin Baker, and Sylvester McCoy, and a reappearance of
Jon Pertwee. Yep.
And we are pairing that up with David Tennant in the remake of Fright Night. So those are the two films that we'll be covering next week because it's still spooky time.
We're going to go out beyond that, or
we can. Arizona Solution, by the way, for those of you who are interested, streaming for free on Amazon Prime. The following week, we kind of get to pair up our two Second Doctor influences, one being the Second Doctor, Patrick Troughton in the original The Omen, and then Matt Smith in a zombie movie called Patient Zero. And then we conclude with First Doctor Richard Herndl in I, Monster, and Paul McGann in Afraid of the Dark. And did we decide on the other, or is that a housekeeping thing?
Let's talk about that off mic.
Fair enough.
It looks like if you want to stream Fright Night, you can do it on the Sci-Fi app or the USA app.
Oh, really?
Oh,
you probably have to have a cable subscription for both. But
I imagine.
Surely. But
they are available to stream there.
Very good. And if you missed the list there and you want to go back and recap, you can find it on our website, travelingvortex.com. You can find updates on the podcast there. And while you're there, click on the Patreon link and consider supporting us. All of your money goes right into this show. And thank you for those of you that are already supporting us. And remember, you can send your comments to feedback@travelingthevortex.com by clicking on the send feedback link. And until next time, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you. Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.